Good afternoon. Welcome again. We've always been very clear that we will be transparent with you and tell you what it is that we're thinking. And also, of course, we've also been clear that this is a constantly evolving picture. The Civil Contingencies Authority is currently working to a schedule of meeting every 2 weeks. And at our meeting 2 weeks ago, the authority agreed at that time not to extend the Day 7 test pilot, but instead to focus our limited resources on developing options for travel without a requirement to self-isolate. And that's, of course, what we told you at the last media briefing 2 weeks ago today. Now, since then, we have picked up an increased anxiety at the 14-day self-isolation requirement, not actually from the business community who have welcomed the business tunnel concept, but actually from the rest of the community, particularly, of course, with families that have been separated for such a long period. So at our meeting yesterday, the CCA, the Civil Contingencies Authority, asked staff to examine whether and when we might have the resources to safely resume the 7-day test regime. And actually we noted that if this did take effect, it might have an impact on the introduction of unquarantined travel. So we need to understand the implications of that, and Paul actually will explain some of the issues that are involved in studying that issue. Now, I must stress that absolutely no decisions have yet been taken. I'll say that again because it's so important. No decisions have been taken yet. And we may yet change our thinking again as we receive new information. That is the story of this whole experience from mid-February onwards. And one of the new pieces of information, for example, is today's publication of increased COVID infection rates in the UK. And Nikki is going to explain a little bit more about what that may mean. And so for those looking to make travel bookings, I must emphasise that when I say no decisions have been made, that actually also includes in relation to the 1st of September as a date for unquarantined travel. The flexibility of our responses has been the story of our move through the phases of the exit strategy that we set out at the end of April, the beginning of May. And it should be no surprise that we continue to retain that same flexible response now. Up to now, of course, we've been fortunate that all changes that we have made have been accelerations through the phases, but we can't presume that will continue to be the case. We do not anticipate making any decision on this within the next 7 days. We do need to allow time for the work to be undertaken properly so that the authority can make fully informed decisions. Now, I know how frustrating the absence of any decision is for those looking to plan ahead and make travel arrangements, including, of course, the travel operators themselves. But I will make the same commitment that I've made many times before during this crisis. We will let you know just as soon as we know. So please bear with us, please be patient, and we will continue to keep you informed. And please also remember what a strong position we are in. We do not want to go backwards. We have got completely unrestricted social, business, sporting and community life in the bailiwick. And of course the confidence that gives to the whole community, especially vulnerable groups, is enormous, which is hugely important to our economy. We, of course, have had all of our schools open at the end of the last term. We don't have to wear face masks to go into shops. Our position is simply not the same as other jurisdictions around us. So we shouldn't, if you like, cherry pick the things that we like about others and conveniently ignore the things that we don't like. We are delighted with the success of the air bridge to the Isle of Man, with so many extra seats being needed. And of course we welcome the first 97 visitors from the Isle of Man who arrived on the first flight. And I've got no further news on any other air bridges at this point. The charter business tunnels have been available from this week too, and there have been some interest in their use. And the scheduled service with Orkney will begin next week. We will be closely and regularly monitoring the use of business tunnels, as of course the CCA does with all the limited exceptions to the quarantine rules, to ensure that they are being used for the right reasons. And there have been 8 applications to use business tunnels so far. The head of law enforcement, Rory Hardy, will talk in a moment about enforcement actions. And really all I need to say is just a huge thank you to both the public and all the law enforcement authorities for helping to ensure that our rules are properly adhered to, helping to ensure, of course, as it does, that our community can continue to operate without restrictions within the bailiwick bubble, which is so important to our community and our economy. So that's enough from me, and Heidi next.
Let's go in. I'm going to keep my update relatively short and sweet today, as I know we've got quite a bigger panel than we normally do. Firstly, you may have seen the front page of today's paper detailing HSC's response to the Scrutiny Management Committee regarding contracts offered to primary care to provide resilience in the healthcare system as we entered lockdown in March this year. Let me be very clear, there has been no secrecy over these contracts, quite the reverse actually. These contracts were developed at pace following approaches from the 3 practices when the crisis began to affect them, and as a possibility of 1,200 COVID-19 related deaths was a reality we thought we were facing. There were real concerns about the resilience of the health and care system at the time, something we were very open about when we sat here back in March. We had to protect the island, and we worked with primary care practices to ensure we did just that. At the heart of these negotiations was a desire to both ensure best value for taxpayers' money and make primary care more affordable for islanders, something which government and the public have been requesting for some time. So anyone with COVID-19 related symptoms didn't have to pay for an appointment, and the cost of telephone consultations and repeat prescriptions could be reduced. All practices as private businesses were offered the choice of signing one of 2 contracts, limited for 3 months, one which required ongoing joint working with HSC, and another which paid an agreed rate for doctors and nurses in a call-off contract for time spent. Queen's Road Medical Practice chose to sign the joint working contract. The other 2 practices chose not to sign a contract at all, but they're all offered the same contracts and all could have worked out the value of each contract to them at the time. The final contract signed by Queen's Road had minor changes that were generally of a technical issue, and the contract value was unaffected. As private businesses, once a contract has been signed, there's no reason to share this information with other businesses. However, all practices have shared this publicly in the spirit of openness and transparency. And also in the interest of transparency, the full response to the Scrutiny Management Committee, along with the copies of the draft contracts that were offered, have been published today on the state's website on gov.gg coronavirus. So now I've got that out of the way, onto some new news. I'm pleased to advise, further to the announcement 2 weeks ago when I advised that exemptions would be granted for compassionate or specific medical reasons, that anyone who is an inpatient at a UK hospital will, if they choose, only have to self-isolate for 7 days on their return to Guernsey if their 7-day test proves negative. Further details will be out next week, but in the meantime, if people have any questions, please email publichealth@gov.gg. And to keep up the positive note, and echoing Gavin's welcome to those passengers who arrived in Guernsey from the Isle of Man using the air bridge, I'd like to announce today that discussions are taking place to establish a reciprocal health agreement between Guernsey and the Isle of Man. We know that such an agreement will give residents of both islands confidence to travel, particularly where they might otherwise struggle to obtain medical insurance using the air bridge that is now in place. On another front, during lockdown, HSC introduced new ways of working to enable as many services as possible to continue to be delivered. This included offering telephone consultations, meetings via Microsoft Teams, and the introduction of helplines. Now in Phase 5, staff have asked for feedback on these new ways of working to establish which ones are seen as improvements by service users. COVID-19 meant that health visitors had to cancel the traditional well baby clinics, which were held on a drop-in basis, and they're offered individual appointments to either have babies weighed or discuss any concerns parents may have had about their baby or child. These appointments have given parents more flexibility with when they could attend and more privacy, and have gone down well, and it's been decided to continue them for the future. Making changes like this is very much in the spirit of the Partnership of Purpose, which will have a key role to play as part of the Revive and Thrive recovery plan. I also want to use today to give our community survey one more big push. We're really grateful to everyone who has responded so far, and we've had 3,100 responses. There's a week to go before it closes, and the last day is the 30th of July. Now, interestingly, most of those who have responded so far are women. Only 30% of those 3,000 responses are from men. So, chaps, we do want to learn how the public health emergency and the measures we have taken have affected you. So please do take time to fill it out. And that includes Mr. Salisbury if he's listening in. So you can find it on gov.gg/community survey. There are Latvian, Portuguese and Polish versions, as well as an easy read version of the survey. Along with the ongoing community monitoring tool, this survey is a big part of how we plan to really learn from these past few months and make sure we are even better at responding to this crisis or others like it going forward. And to end my update today, a reminder that people need to be vigilant about symptoms of COVID-19, no matter how mild. We need you to look out for muscle ache, headache, loss of taste or smell, sore throat, fever, shortness of breath, or a new continuous cough. Please don't ignore them and hope they go away. Please don't worry that you're being a nuisance. Please don't worry about being another positive case in the Berwick. If we know about it, then we can contain it. You'll be doing everyone a favour. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Nikki.
Thank you very much. So we now have had the last positive case on the 30th of April. So we're doing well. We've tested over 7,800 people within the bailiwick. So all of that is very positive. However, I would like to remind you all to be vigilant. And as Deputy Salisbury said, be aware of the symptoms associated with COVID-19. So from our perspective, not only it's coming forward for testing, which is really important, but also whilst you're waiting testing, you should stay in self-isolation. So if you've booked a test, then you should stay in self-isolation until you've had the test and indeed you've got what is hopefully a negative result. So really important that we continue to remain vigilant. So as ever, we're preparing for a number of scenarios. We're preparing to see an individual case within the bailiwick. We're preparing to see a cluster of cases, all of which we will manage through our community test, track and trace programme. We're also preparing for a second wave. Really important that we're aware and we have our preparations in place. Other things we're looking at is we're looking towards the winter and looking at winter planning. So looking at our seasonal flu immunisation campaign, looking at what else we can do to protect the health and well-being of islanders over the winter period. And what we're also doing is preparing for a mass vaccination campaign for when the COVID-19 vaccine becomes available. We don't know when that is at the moment, but it is potentially either towards the end of this year or early next year. We remain to be informed when the vaccine will be available. But the groups that we're going to immunise is most likely to be the over 50s, to be the high-risk groups, and obviously to be frontline health and care workers. So over the last few weeks, we've also been doing antibody testing. So we've tested in the region of just over 500 frontline or health and care workers, so working across health and care services, and we've found that 2.9% of those are antibody positive. What we're now doing is we're interviewing those individuals as we would have interviewed our cases to see if we can see any linkages between the clusters of cases that we had in the early days. It's important that we test these health and care workers because it'll give us some definition of what the magnitude of our primary wave was. What we're also doing at the same time, we've written to some 140 individuals, and these are 140 people who had symptoms relating to COVID-19 or symptoms suggestive of COVID-19 in February, March time before we had our on-island testing. And we're inviting them to come forward for a test and testing them. So that forms part of the one piece of work we're doing. Another piece of work we're doing, and I'm really keen to see this, is to have a look at how many of the 238 recovered patients within the bailiwick have post-COVID symptoms. So we've devised a questionnaire which we're going to be sending out to all of the recovered people that are recovered from COVID-19 to understand if they're experiencing any post-COVID symptoms. Now, this is important for two reasons. The first thing is that enables us to understand what health and care facilities we need to provide for these individuals post-COVID, but it also gives us a greater understanding of what we need to prepare for should we experience a future wave. So really important that we look forward to that. And I think from my perspective, other than saying that we need to stay vigilant because we know that the prevalence in the UK, the community prevalence, has just been published and it's up to 1 in 1,200 now, 1 in 2,000. So really important that we just continue to stay aware of what's happening in our neighbouring jurisdictions. So thank you.
Thank you. Nikki, just two things before we move on to Rory. The prevalence rate was, how's that moved in the UK?
Yes, okay. So the last, it was 1 in 3,900, then it was 1 in 2,300, and it's now 1 in 2,000. Now, what I need to add a word of caution here is that they're very wide confidence intervals. So at the most, if you look at the UK data, it's probably a flattening. So there's an initial quite steep decrease in the number of cases, and now you're seeing a flattening. But certainly you're not seeing an ongoing decrease in the number of cases. So really important that we understand that when we try and assess the risk of the surrounding jurisdictions.
Okay. The second thing, we've talked frequently, and you've talked about it quite a lot today, about the concept of a second wave. Could you just explain what that really means and the difference between that and perhaps what we've seen in certain parts of the world, or even in the UK, of Leicester, for example, of a spike of activity in a particular area? Because there is a difference, isn't there? And just so that people understand what we really mean when we talk about a second wave going around the world.
Yeah. So a second wave in a country will be usually a nationwide increase in the number of cases that you see. Now, what Deputy St Pierre alluded to was the regional spikes that we've seen in the UK. I think we're unlikely to see regional spikes here. I don't think we'll see a spike in the Forest and not in the Vale, for example, because I think we'd be considered as a single region. So what we would see with the second wave is a bit like what we saw in March, towards the end of March into April, is an increase in the number of cases on a day-to-day basis, which is when we brought in our lockdown and then rapidly decreased the number of cases. So it's a significant increase in the number of cases over a defined period of time in a geographically defined area.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Rory.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody, from all the staff at Law Enforcement. We continue to be on the front line of the island's COVID response across the whole bailiwick. As many of you will have seen, there was another isolation breach case in court earlier this week, with another 2 cases due before the courts on Monday. So far, 2 people have each been fined £6,000. This is a direct result of the work undertaken by the Guernsey Border Agency. We know there is public anxiety around the self-isolation rules and how robust the checks are on those who are meant to be isolating. So please, let me be clear. The Border Agency has been additionally resourced specifically to undertake this most vital of tasks. With the support of other Home Department agencies such as the Guernsey Fire and Rescue Service, we have increased the capacity of home visits and welfare checks. Each day, calls and unannounced visits are being made in order to ensure compliance, as well as checks on the welfare of those in isolation. This will continue to happen. The movement of people in and out of the bailiwick also focuses upon private aircraft, private boats, and visiting yachts. Please be assured we are very busy but effectively managing this work to protect you, the public. Through our social media channels, we will continue to highlight the successful prosecutions. And although I can't comment directly on cases before the court, there are currently at least 5 additional investigations underway. If anyone has reason to suspect non-compliance with self-isolation, please call the Joint Emergency Services Control Centre on 725 111. Bailiwick law enforcement exists to keep these islands safe and secure. Ensuring compliance with isolation forms a critical part of that. No one should doubt our resolve on this. However, please do not post on social media gossip or concerns about individuals involved in isolation breaches. It is a negative thing to do. It's not evidence-based and it can often be wrong. If you have concerns about anybody breaching self-isolation, I would encourage you to call Jessic and pass on your concerns. You can do this anonymously. As I've said, a number of social media posts have been very misleading and simply wrong, so please don't do this. Over the course of our work, the GBA have managed 4,736 cases of self-isolation. Currently, there are 515 people in self-isolation across the bailiwick. We've undertaken nearly 1,000 home visits and over 3,000 telephone contacts. The Joint Emergency Services Control Centre continues to work 24/7 dealing with all the 999 calls and the blue light services. They're also continuing to manage the staff at the COVID clinical helpline, which is run on behalf of public health. This helpline operates between 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday to Friday. This is for any calls where the caller or their family have symptoms such as cough, sore throat, fever, as mentioned by my colleagues. Your calls will be triaged and symptoms will be assessed by one of the operators, and they will give you advice as to the next steps you should take. Outside these core hours, all the calls are diverted into the main control room, and there will be staff there who can manage your questions and queries. We expect the triage helpline to run for the foreseeable future, so please ensure you have the number to hand and you can always get advice. To date, we've received over 11,000 calls through this call centre. If you have symptoms or you simply just need advice, the numbers are 756 938 or 756 969. These numbers are available on our social media. Our focus continues also to be on domestic abuse and safeguarding, and resources within the police, as well as our partner agencies, are fully staffed and resourcing these issues. We understand there are widespread concerns about the impact the COVID emergency may have had on victims of domestic abuse. And we have been, and we remain we are there for the public who have any concerns in this area. Calls for assistance in the context of domestic incidents did increase during lockdown. However, the numbers of actual domestic assaults have remained relatively consistent with times outside COVID. The nighttime economy is well and truly back into full swing, which is excellent for businesses and the hospitality sector, and our policing response has adapted back to ensuring that it is appropriately policed, and we continue to work with licensees in our community. Law enforcement will continue to review the processes with respect to our learning and experiences throughout the COVID emergency, and as said by Nikki, we'll be working together with our key partners, preparing for the autumn and the winter ahead. Finally, I'd like to once again thank our community for all their support and engagement with law enforcement.
Great, thank you very much, Rory. So, Lyndon, Revive and Thrive.
Thank you, Gavin. Once again, I'm very pleased to join the panel, and second time round I feel marginally less like an imposter. I want to talk about three things, very briefly, all of which relate to how we give some momentum for the delivery of the recovery strategy. The first is what we will prioritise in order to support recovery. The second is an update on our ability to invest in recovery. And third is the economic environment in which we find ourselves as a small jurisdiction connected into the global economy. In relation to the first, a short update on what the COVID Recovery Advisory Group agreed at its last meeting. Now, the COVID Recovery Advisory Group is comprised of the President and Vice President of the Policy and Resources Committee, as well as each of the presidents of the principal committees, so a very representative body. At our meeting, we agreed that the states would now prioritise 4 critical areas of work: COVID response, our Revive and Thrive recovery, preparing for the UK leaving the EU, and our general election. Now, that will require some difficult decisions to be made in respect of prioritisation. But if this is achieved successfully, it will bring dividends in respect of a robust ongoing COVID response, a safe, fair general election, a smooth transition when the UK exits the EU, and meaningful progress in respect of the recovery strategy in the short term. So, in respect of the latter, the States Assembly has now approved the Revive and Thrive recovery strategy in its green paper form. And work is ongoing to develop action plans and shape priorities, with the intention being that for the foreseeable future, the recovery strategy takes the place of the future Guernsey plan. There will be a need to ensure that the prioritisation process that supports it takes account of available capacity, capability and resources, thereby improving the likelihood of a successful and speedy recovery. This can be considered in respect of the Thrive aspect of the recovery strategy, which has a longer-term horizon. However, alongside that, there is a pressing need to develop Revive initiatives. Ideally, the Revive phase will comprise a series of relatively short-term actions that will boost the economy and increase consumer confidence. As part of this, there is a need to include some potentially short-term initiatives that give the community and the economy an immediate boost, and with that, a feel-good factor. On Monday of this week, a long list of options were discussed at the meeting of the COVID Recovery Action Group, or CRAG as I shall now refer to it. I won't go through that long list now, as the next step is, following the direction of the political members there, that they are narrowed down to a deliverable shortlist, which CRAG will be asked to move forward with. The intention is that we see some real, tangible action to give our recovery an adrenaline shot, and that we see that happen this side of Christmas. We cannot go through the rest of this year with nothing to show but ideas and talk. I'm hoping we will be able to announce those tangible actions as soon as next month. Of course, along the way, specific and often significant steps are being taken to support our economy and competitiveness. One of these, that will support the finance sector, is to effect legislative amendments to the Limited Partnership Guernsey Law, 1995. Now, this may sound like financial jargon to most listeners, and possibly to some on the panel, but I think it's important that I do mention it now, because these changes will make it far easier for new funds to be brought to Guernsey from other jurisdictions. It is a simple step to remove barriers and clear the way for new business to come to our island and help our economy. It's absolutely the kind of move we should make, simple and quick, but it's a big deal for our biggest sector, and it will bring more business and work to Guernsey and its finance and professional services sector. I also want to talk about borrowing. You'll be aware that the States recently secured a revolving credit facility for £225 million, working with 5 local banks. This week, our credit rating from Standard & Poor's was reaffirmed as AA-. Well, what does that mean in plain speak? It means we've been assessed to be in good financial shape with good creditworthiness, and that in turn allows us to get a good rate on our credit facility. It is the best credit rating that a jurisdiction of our type can achieve, and it reflects, in my view, the exemplary fiscal management of our economy, so far at least. In issuing our credit ratings, Standard & Poor's gave some forecasts for our economy. They predicted it would shrink something like 9% this year. Our own modelling suggests currently somewhere around 8%. That said, my instincts, for what it's worth, tell me that with 5 months of 2020 to go, the number will be closer to 6%. What's good news, or what's good in that, is that they predicted, S&P, we would be back to where we were within 3 years. And as we know, our Revive and Thrive plan aims higher than that, to be even better than we would have been economically within that time frame. But nonetheless, we all agree this is a very significant recession. For context, the 2008 financial crisis saw the economy shrink by about 3%. So even if I am right and we only shrink by 6%, it will still be twice what it was as a consequence of the GFC. Now, I remember that period well. The global financial crisis coincided with my election as Chief Minister, although contrary to popular belief, the two events were unrelated. Some of us will feel like things are nearly back to normal, and in many ways, thankfully, they are, at least here in the bailiwick. But the economic hit is far from normal. Some people have always treated it as a rule of thumb that Guernsey doesn't borrow. But things have needed to be done differently this time around. The revolving credit facility, already agreed, is purely to fund some of the immediate financial needs of the COVID crisis. The states will be asked to go further to fund key aspects of its recovery. The credit rating means we're in a good position to get a good deal, but we also need to be bold and brave and demonstrate the will to invest in ourselves, in our businesses, and in our bailiwick. Finally, I would like to update you on the Guernsey Together investment product. For those who follow states proceedings, they'll remember our colleague, Deputy Roffey, put forward the excellent idea of creating a local retail bond, something islanders can invest in, knowing it will support our community's economic recovery. We have sent out to the private sector invitations for expressions of interest and proposals to develop this investment product. We've had 3 responses already, which we're assessing, and I'm hopeful we'll be in a position to issue the first Guernsey Together investment product in weeks rather than months. Thank you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you very much, Lyndon. Okay, so, Paul. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm so used to having 5.
Yes, I think we went in the wrong order.
We
but
did
never
go
mind.
around the wrong
Yeah.
order, yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, Paul.
So clearly a core theme for today is our progress in moving to phase 6, but in a way that we continue to revive and thrive, and this will continue to be the big focus for the public sector, as indeed government, as it is of interest for many in the community. Deputy St-Pierre has talked about the options before us and what needs to be considered by the CCA politically. Dr. Brink looks at what can work as a safe way of enabling more travel from a public health point of view. I want to talk about the job for the public sector in making this all happen, delivering whichever option for travel and border controls is found to be the most appropriate. In doing so, again, I want to be open and honest. As noted by Deputy St-Pierre, that's been the hallmark of our response to COVID throughout, and it's the reason I believe we've been so united as a community. Whatever model is adopted to get us out of phase 6, or get us to phase 6, which if it is safe to do so, may be as soon as September, our public services will deliver it. Our staff in all areas of public service have performed incredibly. At times, and for many, it has felt there's been little respite, but they know the importance of their work at this time, especially getting phase 6 in place, but essentially doing it against an evidence base and operating safely. For the community, it's right that I give you some awareness to the scale of the challenge public services face. I'm often asked, how are things? They must be settling down now. It's a fair question. I think on other lines of work, things would be settling down now, but for many areas of the public service, the civil service, healthcare, law enforcement, staff at the ports, rather than settling down, this is probably the toughest and most challenging period since we entered lockdown in March. Working from the learning points of the recent pilot, the task of planning out a range of models for travel is enormous. Each one will require its own design for how passengers' arrivals are monitored, supported, data flows are captured, screening tests, possibly carried out more than once, how this is policed and monitored, how it's communicated, and importantly, how we introduce backups and fail-safes and resilience in those processes. We are expanding our testing capacity to allow more people in. How we ensure our track and trace definitely can capture any case that does arrive on Ireland. All of this draws in a whole range of public services, not just our team at Public Health or Pathology, crucial as they are. We have set up a dedicated team to oversee the planning out of all our travel options, to test and challenge those plans, ensure we are properly resourced, and in doing so make sure every piece is in place to enable public health and the CCA to decide to give the green light to a change in our travel policy when it is safe to do so. Nothing is completely risk-free, but we know that the effectiveness of our next model for managing air and sea passenger arrivals into the bailiwick will be the difference between continuing with the restriction-free life we're enjoying now in phase 5 and not risking moving to an earlier phase of lockdown, with all the impacts that has, personal, social, and of course economic. There is a lot at stake. We aim to get this right for our community. And unlike when we entered lockdown, where really everything else in terms of services was put on hold and our public sector could focus on just that one immediate task, this time we do have other priorities. Our continuing response to COVID border plans and a future regime to deliver vaccinations to over 38,000 islanders. The Revive and Thrive recovery plan, delivering an election, Brexit and preparing for the UK to leave the EU. These things cannot be put on hold any longer. I'm grateful that we've had this recognised by the Policy and Resources Committee and supported by the COVID Recovery Advisory Group, in that we need to keep control on the overall list of government priorities. Now, with those serious points made, I do want to end on some positives. When it comes to travel, while we know it's still hard on our visitor economy, our staycation campaign has gone from strength to strength, softening a little bit the impact on those businesses. There have been more than 287,000 page views of the tourism businesses featured on the staycation website, and that's an increase of 60,000 in July alone. 33 of those page views have led to people clicking through to the sites of individual local businesses. Independent research says at least half of bailiwick residents have booked or are planning a staycation this year. And of course, we have over 1,000 friends from the Isle of Man visiting us, enjoying a stay in our lovely island over the summer. We're still promoting the support local message for retail, and you'll have seen the banners in town and behind us today on the front of Frossard House as you drive past. That also goes for local events. So many of the big events in Guernsey calendar couldn't go ahead this year, but encouragingly, we're seeing some now able to take place. This week, the Royal Agricultural and Horticultural Society show took place, and that was enjoyed by many. Castle Nights has started again, and I've just seen this poster on my way in today at Beausejour for Rockame Regatta in the first weekend of September. I was in Herm not long ago with hundreds of islanders for the Fade to Grey 80s music night, and we know at the beginning of August, Alderney Week is once again back on. It's fantastic that we can enjoy these events, something that many places are still not able to do. And in many cases, they serve as fundraisers for local charities who have seen their normal funding seriously impacted because of the pandemic. So again, support your events, support your charities, and support local. My final message today is about the election. In the world of COVID, organising an election may not seem a big deal, but it is. And we can't forget that it's our very first island-wide election, a completely new system, which in itself is a significant challenge for the public sector, given the contracted time we've had to prepare. What I'd ask of the community is, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for the electoral roll, so you have the option to vote in the October election. The deadline for registering is the 21st of August, exactly 4 weeks from now. If you have registered before lockdown, you don't need to do it again, but if you've not registered since the last election in 2016, then you do need to do it again. It's easy to do, you can do it online, just go to election2020.gg. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Right, over to questions. Who would like to kick off first?
I'll go
Go on.
first if you like. My name's Helen Bowditch. I'm from the Guernsey Press. I just wanted to ask about the 7-day pilot, because I think there's perhaps been a bit of confusion about why it wasn't extended, and maybe the sort of possibly the reasons have been a little bit downplayed about why it wasn't extended. So, and especially because 615 passengers came through, no one tested positive, so that sort of suggests it was a success. So could you just sort of clarify why it wasn't extended?
Well, I'll kick off, and then perhaps others need to contribute as well, because it's a bigger question than it may at first seem. I think the first point to make is a pilot is just a pilot, so it should only ever have been seen as such. There was never any assurance or even any indication given that it would be anything other than the pilot. And the reason you do a pilot is in order to be able to test the operational environment and all the procedures that go around that. So I think that's the first thing to say. In terms of the results of the pilot, again, I think both Heidi and Nikki can comment on that in terms of the kind of the clinical results. But I think also Paul can contribute in terms of the operational issues, because that's really what we're having to reflect on in thinking about the practicality of actually moving to a day 7 test. So I don't know who would like to go next. Nikki?
So the results that we tested 615 individuals and all of them were negative. That was really encouraging. We were pleased with the throughput in the testing centre. We've been asking people for feedback so that we can learn any lessons. So we've got some tweaks that people have suggested to the system. And I think with any program that you introduce, you've got to introduce it and you've got to be prepared to learn, and you've got to be prepared to improve it the whole time. So it relatively minor tweaks, but nevertheless things that we could potentially do better. A simple thing. So for example, if someone had a foreign mobile number, it wasn't necessarily apparent, and we had to then do a bit of fishing to find out the country of origin, so that we were able to contact their people so that we could organise their 7-day test. So things like that we're tweaking. Those are relatively minor, but the results were encouraging. Do I think they were surprising? Probably not, because most of the travellers came in from England, and we knew at the time we were running the pilot that the prevalence was round about 1 in 3,000, 3,800. So we tested 615 people, we got them negative, so not too surprising at all. So I think it's important that we look at what we did. The feedback that we had from people with regard to how they felt about the pilot, I think most people really welcomed it. We had to make it clear to people that the second part of the pilot wasn't you've done your 7 days and that's it, that you then went into passive surveillance up to day 14, and that meant that you couldn't go to restaurants, clubs, pubs and so on. And I think most people were really appreciative of the fact that just being able to get out, say go to the beach, go and buy themselves some emergency, not emergency, for some required food and so on, they found that very encouraging. So that was really positive from that side. So,
Paul?
Yes, I wouldn't want to add too much more, but just to say, following on from my statement today, that the pilot, just as Deputy St Pierre has said, was just that. It was a pilot. It was a test in order to learn. And numbers, if you remember and recall, were capped throughout the pilot. What we wanted to take from that learning was also how we would build our numbers, our resilience and our resourcing in order to cope with non-quarantine travel, and that's what we were aiming for specifically. So the sort of resource demand, in other words, the supervision, both from the public health point of view, but also those that were working at the ports and the capture, isn't sustainable if we were running that every single day. It was to learn what we'd need to do. And one of the fundamental aspects is that we're building a substantial database so that we can capture an increase of up to 5,000 passengers and cope with these numbers. And I just go back to my starting point. The whole point of this, whatever we do, we are absolutely doggedly determined to do it safely, based on evidence from public health, as Dr. Brink says, and then build a system that assures our safety for the community.
Yeah, it's understanding that the resource implications, it's not just a question of swabs going through a machine that produces a result. It's all that go around it in terms of the border agency team, the people that are making the callbacks, all the rest of it, and that's why the scaling up has such a big impact. Next question, Ewan.
Ewan Duncan from BBC Guernsey. I'm not entirely sure Helen perhaps got the answers she was hoping for there. I heard Dr. Brink say it was not surprising we didn't find any positive tests. She said it was a welcomed pilot, but Paul did say it wasn't sustainable. Is there perhaps an option to go to 7 days, as Dr. Brink has just said, the second week of self-isolation where people can actually get out to the beach, they can actually go to the shops, do those kind of things. Is there an opportunity to have a 7-day trial where there's limited numbers? That way, at least people can perhaps enjoy more freedom than they are now, but it's being more closely monitored than just a free-for-all.
Well, as I said in opening, the Civil Contingencies Authority yesterday have asked that the team look at moving to a day 7 test, but understand the resource implications of that. I think in terms of limiting the numbers, there are very real, that introduces a whole new dynamic in terms of how you would ration access to that. So I think it's, and bearing in mind that this is about moving to phase 6, where effectively we are reopened to the world. It's certainly not been one of the considerations that we've considered as to how you would seek to ration access to the day 7 test.
No, and really it's saying having a day 7 test might be the bridge between having the restrictions we've got now and the 14-day self-isolation. Just going straight to all opening borders might, for some people, might feel too much. It's whether we consider looking at the 7-day isolation as kind of a bridge to fully opening. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about at the moment. But the difference is this was a pilot. It was for learning and to understand what worked and what didn't. That's what, as Dr. Brink says, the importance of getting the evidence to see what works. Because if we do go and open it all up, we need to know that we can do it. We don't make a mess of it at the start, and it works as smoothly as it possibly can. So, and that is what people are trying to do at the moment.
Can I just add to it? I remember when you said you were launching the scheme, there would be places for around about 1,000 people. Obviously, we've had significantly less at 615, and if we're saying that we sort of reached capacity in terms of our resources for that, what kind of hope does that give us for the future in terms of dropping border control completely?
Well, again, I'm not going to answer that question because that's precisely the question that we've asked the team to go away and look at.
It's all about planning.
Yeah, it's all about planning, exactly.
I mean, the pilot was a pilot to see how it worked. The next stage is making it so that we can actually do it. It's not saying, oh, it's been all too much and we can't ever do it again. It's about saying, right, what do we need to do to make it work and how quickly can we do that by?
So part of that is automating and building the database so we get the data capture. Again, that takes a lot of the manualisation out of it because we've got to also concentrate. If you've got ferry foot passengers, ferry car passengers and the airports, that how many border staff, how many medical staff can we have, or those that need to take swab tests, for example, if that is the chosen method, because we're not going open borders, we're heading towards non-quarantine, which still has safety built into it. So we need people of different disciplines working at the borders. We'll probably have to create different temporary facilities to do that, but we want to build it so it's effective, it's fast, it's slick, it's smooth, and it's safe. And that's what we're building on, rather just to do something and try and do it on a part scale that is less than satisfactory.
And based on what you're saying, do you think we have the resources here on island?
Yes. And that's why we've got to take the time to get it right, and we'll do that. And I think I can't stress any more than I think Deputy St Pierre and Deputy Salisbury have said. We've been given a very clear direction to go away and look at that without restraint on what those resources are, to come back and say what the model would look like, and we are working incredibly hard to do that as we speak.
Okay. Yep.
Hi, Marina Jenkins, Channel TV. In Jersey, the government's business attendance strategy shows 3/4 of businesses say profits have dropped since the start of the pandemic. Also, around a quarter are predicting they will employ fewer people by the end of the summer. Is this a similar situation in Guernsey?
Lyndon, do you want to kick off on that one?
Well, I'm not sure whether the raw data is available, but on the grounds that Jersey has, I don't like making comparisons, but you've asked me the question, on the grounds that Jersey has a larger tourist and hospitality sector, and in both islands the financial services industries which are the dominant industries, were broadly unaffected. I would expect the stress to the Jersey economy to have been greater than here. But exactly how many businesses have reported drops in profits, I don't know. I'm not sure if that. I look to my colleagues to see whether whether they know whether that information is available or not. No.
Yeah.
What we do know, of course, is unemployment has fallen from a peak. It's now hovering around 1,100. We expect that to be a fairly stubborn number in the short term, and we will be working hard to focus on driving that number down to more sort of historical levels of 300 or so. And that's one of our key initiatives for the next few weeks and months.
I think that the additional comments I would make in relation to that is our ability to reopen really the entire domestic economy is one of the things which is a key strength of where we are. The impact of that has been that the co-payment scheme for supporting those in employment is now really, its main application is in relation to the hospitality and tourist sector. So previously, the three big sectors that were reliant on that were construction, retail, and the tourist economy. And really, construction and retail now are pretty well all back in full swing. And indeed, Linda and I were at a meeting yesterday with some builders, and counterintuitively, they are extremely busy, much busier than they expected to be across all sectors, private residential, commercial, and all of that bodes extremely well. We know that the document duty in June was very high, so there are lots of transactions going through the courts in terms of property sales, which is all very positive, and that of course will have a knock-on effect in terms of subsequent work and so on. And I think one of the revive actions that Lyndon was talking about, that the COVID recovery action group was talking about, was how we can support that in terms of some of the employment skills that we need to have to be able to support those sectors that are actually moving very quickly now. So I think what we have is probably an economy that's starting to move at two speeds. We've got with the hospitality sector, which is flat on its back, and we've got other parts of the economy which are actually motoring very nicely, and we need to support that. We need to be supporting them in different ways. We need to be enabling those businesses that are doing very well to continue to do so, and not to lose staff, and to be able to get the staff they need. So it's a different challenge, and matching. It's not necessarily as easy as saying you can put the unemployed, those on the unemployed register, in the businesses, because they may not necessarily have the same skills, the right skill set. So there's some real challenges, but I think overall we're again I think we're in a more positive position than we could reasonably have expected when we were sitting here in April, beginning of May, when with most of the economy, other than the finance sector, essentially shut down. Next question.
You mentioned scaling up. I'm not entirely sure what that means in practical terms. I don't know if it was what Mr. Whitfield mentioned about more people at the borders. But what about the actual testing capacity? Because I understand you've got a testing capacity of around 400 per day. But if you've got 500 people a day who want to come through the borders, how do you cope with that?
Yeah. Do you mind doing that?
Okay. So we've done a lot of work on that, so we know exactly how we'll cope with that, and we'll do that via pooling. So the technology we use is something called polymerase chain reaction-based technology, or PCR-based technology, and that's a highly sensitive technology. What we've done is we've already done the modelling on that, and we've shown that we can pool up to 4, probably 5 samples per well, which means that we can quadruple or increase by 5-fold the number of samples. So 400, you do the maths, becomes 1,600, 2,000. So we can scale up the technology. What we have also procured is we've procured a robot to do the back end of the pipetting. So the samples go into an extraction platform, and then after the extraction platform, we procured a robot to do the pipetting. So those of us that have worked in laboratories, when you pipette huge numbers, you can get concerns about accuracy. And this then brings an automated part to the whole process. So that's really important. So we will be able to scale up through using technology. We're also looking at alternative ways to sample people. So from my perspective, as doing a nasopharyngeal swab is quite time consuming. So we're doing a piece of work on the sensitivity of different sampling techniques. And so we're looking whether we can use a saliva sample, self-taken throat and nose swab, and so on. So actually scaling up the technology is very doable.
Can I just add to that? Committee for Health and Social Care approved extra capital equipment this week to be procured, which will give us even greater resilience and increase testing capacity as well.
Okay, next question. Yes, Marina.
In terms of travel to Jersey, is there any conversations going on, anything in the pipeline that there might be, not an air bridge as such, but any further links with Jersey in terms of not self-isolating for 14 days?
Well, I mean, in essence, it's a commercial decision for any commercial operators between the two islands, but it'll be the same set of regulations required in terms of, to the extent that we currently have self-isolation for 14 days, obviously with certain limited exceptions, it would be no different on that route than any other route. Clearly, if we are able to move in due course to a 7-day test after 7 days of isolation, then that may be equally applicable on that route as well. But again, there's no difference really between Guernsey and between Guernsey and anywhere else. Of course, one thing we have identified is in due course, as we move into September, one of the options also is to look at A and B countries as well, A and B jurisdictions in terms of the point of origin for the traveller and how that would impact on their requirement to quarantine as well. So again, that would be kept under constant review. Ewan.
Whilst we're on the topic of Jersey, since the 3rd of July, they've tested 8,000 people and they've only actually found 4 active cases. So you're looking at 1 case in every 2,000 people. Is there now a point where we have to look at what Jersey are doing and think, well, do we maybe have a look and think, can we apply that here, rather than the strict line that we've been going so far? 1 case out of 2,000 doesn't seem like it's going to overwhelm the island based on what's already been said.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as ever, I think we clearly, in terms of making decisions, we are cognizant of what's going on in other jurisdictions, but we've, from day one back in February, have always said we will make the right decisions based on what we think is right for our own jurisdiction at any given time. Our situation is very different, and as I said in opening, Jersey is not in the same position in terms of the restrictions within its own borders. So they have accepted a different regime for their own community. Now that is their choice. That's what they have chosen to do. I'm not in any way remotely critical. They have made their own decisions for what they think is right for themselves. For us, we're looking at a situation where our entire domestic economy is open without restriction, and that does change the dynamic of our thinking in terms of how we move forward from here. So yes, we are informed by what's happening elsewhere, as indeed we are by what's happening in Brittany and what's happening in the UK, as Nikki has said as well. But we will continue to make the decisions that we think are right based on the information not only from Nikki and her team, but also from Paul and his team as to what's actually doable, which comes back to the resources point. Next question.
Just following on from what from Ewan's question there, I mean, are you confident that you've got the balance right? Because September the 1st is still 5 weeks away, and even though it's great that we've had no new cases for almost 3 months, it's creates really good vibes and gives really good sort of publicity to Guernsey. For someone who perhaps has lost their job or they really want to see relatives, it could almost be a little bit of a hollow victory. Is that something you sort of weigh up?
Yeah, of course it is. And again, as I said in opening, we constantly keep everything under review, as we have done from moment one. We are very well aware of the ongoing impact on families of restrictions on travel, and we all have friends and family off island, and have that sense of separation. So we're all in the same boat here in terms of that experience. So yes, absolutely, it is informing what our thinking is, and as I said, it's primarily the community reaction and ability to cope with this, and the mental health and well-being aspects that we've constantly touched on, understanding the impact of 14 days isolation, how that can be safely managed within a family unit, that is helping to inform us as well. It's not, that's a more important dynamic right now as we sit here in July and August than for example, the economy and business connections. Paul, you want to come in?
I just think that's absolutely right, and I think the point Deputy St Pierre made earlier on, it is really critical that every jurisdiction is slightly different. We know from today in the UK they've gone back to wearing face masks to go to the shops, to go outside. Other restrictions other jurisdictions closer to us are maintaining social distancing. We are maintaining a near normal method of day-to-day life in Guernsey. You know, one of the first ambitions, one of the first objectives was to get the real economy back on its feet. That's, as you can see today, that's exactly where we're heading, and now we're putting some really hard-nosed work is how we would take that to the next phase and open up in terms of non-quarantine travel in a safe way to complement that. And we're talking quite a short order in time in the bigger scale of things, and one cannot forget the flare-ups we're seeing elsewhere globally, the potential of a second wave. We need to be absolutely prepared for that. As Deputy Salisbury said, we've built in replicant resilience to all our equipment. So you talked about the 400. We've actually bought another machine that's on standby behind that. One, if we want to increase testing, but secondly, if one goes down and we're actually in non-quarantine travel, we've got the ability on island. We're not sending any tests off island, still don't. And we continue to do our job looking after our community safely.
Heidi.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I think we can forget quite quickly just how different it is here compared with elsewhere. I mean, my son's camped out in the UK. He decided not to come home, and he's stayed over there for the last 4 months, which is difficult. You know, we'd like to see him, but he also, by talking to him, understand how different it is in the UK, and having to go and find a mask, and how he goes going to the shop, and how things are shut, and you just realise how very different it is here. And also at the same time, what we've done, because the community has been so amazing that we got to the state we are so early, we can now really build on the economy. And Lyndon was talking about the different makeup in Jersey in terms of their economy, and also the fact that they didn't release restrictions as soon as we have. Indeed, I don't think all the schools went back at last term like they did here. Gives us the opportunity to really try and help and support those people who have been made unemployed, get those new jobs in, and work at pace, which is exactly as Lyndon said. We've got to move really quickly on this. It shouldn't be the Revive and Thrive plan, shouldn't be a great big policy letter that takes 6 months to a year to finish. We've got to work on it now, and that's exactly where everybody is at this moment in time, and that's our total focus at the moment.
We've just gone over the hour, but I just want to close with responding to your to that last question, which is how comfortable are we we've got it right, and really repeat what we've said before, which is it's only really going to be with the benefit of hindsight that anyone is going to be able to judge whether the decision to make a move from one phase to another, or a particular move in relation to this now, whether we were too early or too late. So, we are constantly asking ourselves, are we doing the right thing? We're constantly challenging ourselves. That's why the decision of the Civil Contingencies Authority 2 weeks ago, which was was in the context it was, which is I said when I opened, and yesterday we said, okay, now we need the staff to go away and do some more work on this. And it's a constantly iterative process reflecting the environment we're living in. So I can't give you a definitive yes, we are absolutely right, or no, I actually think we've got it wrong. As from day one, we're trying to make the best decisions we can based on the information we're given, and history will judge whether we've got it right or not.
It's dangerous to be stubborn as well. I mean, you could say, right, we're going to do this and we're never going to change, and that would be even more dangerous than anything else. And I think we've always been, and we always have been, and will be guided by the evidence, the information provided by Dr. Brink, and listening to Chief Executive about how they can make things happen. And I think it's been the teamwork that's got us as far as we have today, and that will continue.
Good, thank you very much. So we're scheduled to meet again in 2 weeks today, and look forward to seeing you then if there's no reason to meet before. Thank you.